You felt it this morning, didn't you? Not something loud or obvious, nothing you could point to and prove, just a shift, subtle, almost quiet enough to ignore. But it stayed with you. That strange weight in your chest when you thought of her, the way your mind lingered a little longer than usual, and part of you already knows. Something changed. Before we go any further, just stay with me for a second. If this feeling I'm about to put into words hits somewhere real inside you, you might want to come back to this. Not because I'm asking you to, but because something in you will need to hear it again later. So, do what you need to do. Now, here's what most men get wrong in moments like this. You think feelings are loud, obvious, dramatic. You expect some kind of confession, a clear signal, a moment where everything just clicks into certainty. But that's not how it happens. Not for her. Especially not for a woman who's been holding something back. When she finally accepts her feelings for you, it doesn't look like a movie scene. It looks like silence, like distance, like her sitting with something she didn't plan to feel. Because acceptance, real acceptance, is uncomfortable. And if you pay attention, you can almost feel the moment it happened. This morning wasn't random. Maybe she woke up and you were the first thought that stayed. Not just passing through, but staying long enough to make her uncomfortable. Maybe something small reminded her of you, and instead of brushing it off like she usually does, she didn't. She paused. And that pause, that's where everything starts to change. Because once a woman stops running from what she feels, she has to face what it means. And what it means is risk. Not just of rejection, but of losing control. Of wanting something she didn't plan, of needing someone in a way she's been trying not to. You see, what you're sensing right now, this subtle shift, it's not her coming closer yet. You see, what you're sensing right now, this subtle shift, it's not her coming closer yet. It's her realizing she can't stay where she was anymore. And that realization, that's where things get complicated. There's a moment most men completely miss because nothing happens on the outside. No message, no confession, no sudden change in behavior that you could screenshot and analyze with your friends later. But internally, it's loud. For her, acceptance doesn't arrive like clarity. It arrives like conflict. And I want you to understand this part carefully because this is where your mind usually starts writing the wrong story. When she finally lets herself feel something real for you, she doesn't immediately become warmer or more available. In fact, sometimes she does the opposite. She pulls back. Not because she's lost interest, but because interest has now become something heavier than she expected. She's adjusting to the fact that you are no longer just a person in her life. You might interpret that as confusion on her side, or distance, or even rejection trying to reappear. But psychologically, it's simpler than that. She's adjusting to the fact that you are no longer just a person in her life. You've become a presence in her internal world, and that changes everything. This morning, when she accepted it, even if only for a few seconds before she tried to push it away again, something shifted in how she organizes her thoughts. You stopped being optional. And that's the part that unsettles her, because optional feelings are safe. Optional people are easy to manage. You can think about them, enjoy them, put them away, return to your life. But when something crosses into emotional reality, it demands space, and space is expensive. It costs attention, it costs vulnerability, it costs the illusion that she has everything under control. So, what you may notice now, if you're paying attention, is inconsistency. Did something change? A moment of warmth followed by distance. A conversation that felt meaningful followed by silence that feels intentional, even if she would never call it that. And you start asking yourself questions you can't quite settle. Did I imagine it? Did something change? Or am I overthinking again? But here's the uncomfortable truth most men don't want to sit with. You are not imagining the shift. You are just witnessing it before it stabilizes. Because right now, she is standing in that in-between place where feeling something is no longer avoidable, but acting on it still feels too real. And in that space, people don't move straight forward. They oscillate. They test distance. They test memory. They test whether what they feel will survive if they don't feed it for a while. And you are on the receiving end of that instability, trying to make sense of something that hasn't fully become conscious for her yet, which is why it feels so confusing. Because part of her has already accepted it, and another part is still negotiating with what that means. This is the part where most men start to lose themselves a little. Not because anything dramatic is happening, but because nothing is. Silence becomes louder than words. Small inconsistencies start to feel meaningful. You begin reading between lines that may not even exist yet. And I want to be very careful with you here, because your mind will try to turn uncertainty into a story that feels complete. That's what the brain does. It hates emotional ambiguity, so it fills in gaps. But what she's experiencing right now is not a finished story. It's a process that hasn't settled yet. This morning, when she accepted her feelings even briefly, it didn't lock anything in place. It just removed a layer of denial she was using to stay emotionally organized. And once that layer is gone, everything feels more exposed. So she starts doing something very human. She revisits memory, and suddenly, those moments don't feel neutral anymore, they feel charged. But here's where it gets psychologically interesting, because while she is doing this internal review, she is also trying to behave normally in real life. And those two things don't match. So, what you experience from her side is inconsistency that doesn't have language yet, a message that feels slightly delayed in emotional tone, a reply that's technically normal, but somehow carries distance, or warmth that appears unexpectedly and disappears just as fast. And if you're emotionally invested, that inconsistency can start to feel like you're losing your footing. But what's actually happening is more subtle. She is not deciding about you yet. She is deciding about what it means that she feels something at all. Because feeling is easy to justify when it stays abstract. But once she accepts it, once it becomes real enough to acknowledge, then it creates responsibility inside her perception of herself. She is deciding about what it means that she feels something at all. Because feeling is easy to justify when it stays abstract. But once she accepts it, once it becomes real enough to acknowledge, then it creates responsibility inside her perception of herself. And responsibility is where hesitation lives. So she doesn't move toward you yet. She moves inward. She tries to understand whether this feeling is stable or just a passing emotional wave that will dissolve if she gives it enough time. And during that time, you are left in an A that feels uncertain. But uncertainty is not absence, it's transition. And most people misunderstand transition because it doesn't look like progress while it's happening. It just feels like waiting with no guarantee of what comes next. There's something I need you to notice about yourself right now. Not as a judgment, just an observation. When someone becomes emotionally inconsistent with you, your awareness sharpens. You start tracking tone, timing, energy. You replay conversations in your head like you're trying to solve something that refuses to stay still. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to participate in the same instability you're trying to understand. This is where your imagination starts filling in emotional silence. But let's return to her for a moment because what she's doing internally is just as layered. After accepting her feelings this morning, even briefly, she didn't suddenly become certain. She became aware. And awareness in emotional psychology is not comfort, it's exposure. Because now she knows there is something real enough inside her that she can't pretend it isn't there anymore. So she does what most people do when something feels emotionally too alive. She tries to regulate it, not by acting on it, but by containing it. Because if she leans into what she feels too quickly, she risks losing emotional control over something she hasn't fully understood yet. She may distract herself more than usual, overthink small practical things, focus on routines that feel grounding, anything that restores a sense of normal internal order. From the outside, that looks like distance, but internally, it's balance. Because if she leans into what she feels too quickly, she risks losing emotional control over something she hasn't fully understood yet. And people don't like losing control of their own emotional narrative, especially when it involves someone who has already made an impact on them. And here's the part you might not like hearing, but it matters. She is not thinking in terms of choosing you right now. She is thinking in terms of understanding what is happening to me. That distinction changes everything because understanding comes before decision, but understanding takes time. And emotional distance often appears during that process, not because interest is gone, but because processing requires space from intensity. So if you're watching for constant signs of closeness, you're going to miss what's actually happening. The truth is quieter. She is becoming more aware of you internally at the same time she is trying to stabilize herself externally. And those two movements don't align neatly, which is why you feel that strange tension, like something is building but not arriving, like something is real but not settled. And in that unsettled space, your role becomes very simple but not easy. You stop trying to solve her emotional process because what she is going through right now is not meant to be decoded in real time. It's meant to unfold. If I'm honest with you, this is usually the point where men either overreach or completely withdraw. Both come from the same place, uncertainty that starts to feel personal. Because when someone matters to you, emotional distance doesn't feel neutral anymore. It starts to feel like meaning, like something about you must have triggered it. And that's where things get distorted. So let's slow it down for a second and stay close to what's actually happening, not what fear is trying to add on top of it. She didn't wake up this morning and decide anything about you in the way you might think. There wasn't a clean resolution, no internal announcement like, this is it. What happened was more fragile than that. A feeling became undeniable, and once something becomes undeniable, the mind can't treat it like background noise anymore. But here's the part that rarely gets spoken about. Just because something is felt doesn't mean it's ready. There's a gap between emotional recognition and emotional readiness, and that gap is where she is right now. So she might think about you more than she expected. She might notice your absence in small moments. She might even feel a quiet pull towards you that doesn't fully translate into action. But at the same time, she is also evaluating something else, something internal. What does it mean about her if this feeling is real? What does it mean about her patterns, her choices, her emotional timing? Because attraction isn't just about the other person, it becomes a mirror. And mirrors are not always easy to sit with. So what you may see externally is restraint. Not because she is trying to punish distance or create confusion, but because she is trying to keep her internal world from moving faster than her understanding can support. And I want you to hear this part carefully because it matters for how you carry yourself through this. If you respond to her hesitation by chasing clarity, you will only increase the tension. Not because clarity is wrong, but because timing matters more than intensity here. She is not asking you to prove anything. She is adjusting to something inside herself that she didn't schedule, didn't plan, and didn't prepare for. And when that happens to people, they don't move in straight lines. They breathe in and out of certainty. They get closer, then retreat. Not because the feeling disappears, but because they are trying to find emotional footing inside it. And if you can recognize that without rushing it, you stop reacting to the surface and start seeing the process underneath. This is usually the point where silence starts to feel personal again. Not the calm kind of silence, but the kind that makes you question what you thought you understood. You might catch yourself checking for patterns that aren't really there. Timing becomes meaningful in ways it normally wouldn't. Even neutral moments start to feel like they're carrying hidden messages. And I want to be careful here because your mind will try to turn emotional uncertainty into certainty through interpretation. But what's happening on her side is still not that structured. She is not sitting somewhere thinking in a linear way about you, yes or no, closer or further. And that's where people often become more careful, not more expressive. She is moving through emotional recognition in fragments. A thought of you appears uninvited. She notices it. Then she notices that she noticed it. And that second layer is where awareness becomes real, because now it's not just emotion, it's self awareness of emotion. And that's where people often become more careful, not more expressive. She may not even realize she is doing it, but she will start to moderate how much space she allows that feeling to take up during the day. Not because she is trying to erase it, but because she is trying to keep it from spilling into everything else before she understands its shape. And this is where misunderstanding often happens on your side, because moderation can look like disinterest if you're only watching the surface. But internally, it's often the opposite. It's containment. It's emotional pacing. It's the mind saying, I feel something, but I'm not ready to let it define my movement yet. And during that time, she is still learning what kind of feeling this is. Is it temporary intensity? Is it familiarity building too quickly? Or is it something that stays even when she steps away from it? Those questions don't get answered through conversation alone. They get answered through time and distance and emotional consistency, not intensity. And here's the part that tends to unsettle people. If it's real, it doesn't need to be forced forward, but it also doesn't disappear just because it isn't acted on immediately. So, you're left in this space where nothing dramatic happens, but something meaningful is still forming, and that tension between nothing is happening and something is changing is exactly what makes this phase so psychologically uncomfortable, because your nervous system wants closure, but her emotional system is still organizing itself, and those two timelines don't match yet. So instead of trying to read each moment like it contains an answer, the more stable approach is to recognize the pattern underneath it. Awareness has started, containment is happening, and understanding is still forming. And none of that resolves quickly, even if it feels urgent from where you are sitting. If you're still here with me, there's something I want to say to you directly. Not as theory anymore, not as interpretation of someone else's mind, but as something about your own experience of this. Because what you've been feeling through all of this isn't just curiosity about her, it's anticipation mixed with uncertainty. And the brain does something very specific with that combination. It starts to overvalue signals that are incomplete. A delayed reply feels heavier than it is. A moment of warmth feels like direction. A pause feels like meaning. And suddenly, you're no longer just experiencing a connection, you're tracking it. That means nothing about you is being decided in real time the way your mind wants it to be. It also means nothing is being concluded. What's actually happening is quieter than that. A realization surfaced, and now it's being held, examined, softened, questioned, and sometimes even resisted. Because once something becomes emotionally real, people don't just move forward automatically. They adjust their internal world around it first. And that adjustment period is where most of the confusion lives. You feel distance. She feels internal reorganization. You look for clarity. She is still building emotional clarity. Those are not the same timeline, and I need you to hear this carefully. If something is genuine, it doesn't rely on urgency to exist. It doesn't need to be forced into confirmation every hour, every day, every exchange, but it also doesn't become stable just because it was felt once. Stability is built through consistency over time, not intensity in isolated moments. So, what do you do with all of this? Not chase interpretation, not inflate silence into meaning, not turn emotional ambiguity into personal doubt. You stay anchored in what is actually happening, not what your mind is trying to complete. Because right now, the truth is simple. Even if it doesn't feel simple, something was felt, something was recognized, and something is still becoming clear. But it hasn't finished becoming anything yet. And that not yet is where most of this story actually lives.